When Oliver Reed died in May 1999, Britain lost its greatest hellraiser and drunk.
I was known as a wild one by all the folks around. I was known as the wild one.
There is no greater pendulum swing in any human being that I've ever met than Oliver Reed sober to Oliver Reed drunk.
I said to him, I read that you once drank 104 pints in 24 hours. Is that true? And he said, no. It was 48 hours.
I can't think of anyone offhand who had that same quality of brooding sexuality. I can't think of one.
The crack for him wasn't whether I can shag that girl, but, you know, let's go out with Alex Higgins or Keith Moon or the plumber or the carpenter and let's get blind pissed. That was the crack for him.
Mr. Reed, thank you.
Robert Oliver Reed was born in Wimbledon in 1938. Within a year of his birth, his parents split up. It was the start of a severely disrupted childhood. In all, he went to 13 schools and sunk to the bottom of the class at every one. He left school an O-level dropout and was drafted into national service. On his return to Civvy Street in 1958, Reed and his elder brother David went looking for work.
We used to go round London giving out our photographs to advertising agencies, and in the hope that they'd grab us and, you know, use us. And, you know, Ollie was an extraordinarily good-looking person. It's very difficult when you see photographs of him at the end of his life. I mean, in the early years, he was extraordinarily good-looking. I mean, the eyes, were just fantastic.
I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be. Are you gonna give your love to me?
David's wife, Mickey, first met Reed in one of London's trendy hangouts.
We used to go to a coffee bar in the Fulham Road, and I had gone out with David a couple of times, and he suddenly said, oh, my brother's coming tonight. And I thought, oh gosh, jolly nice. And this thing turned up, very good looking. And I said, David, come on, this is not your brother. He had a skull round his neck, and he had a white shirt tied, and the tightest of jeans you've ever seen in your life.
Reed moved into film extra work. Acting was in his blood. His uncle, Sir Carroll Reed, was a famous film director, and his grandfather had founded the drama school, RADA. But Reed had no time for formal training. Instead, he used a variation on the casting couch.
He would go out to parties and find out at this party that there was a girl there who was the secretary to the casting director for the next film, and he'd spend the night with her. And next day, she'd have a picture of Oliver, and the casting director comes in the next morning, whose picture's at the top of the pile, it's Oliver's. You know, so there was real method there.
Reed's first speaking part was in a 1960 comedy thriller. It was a surprising role and an unconvincing performance for a man later notorious for his views on what he called puftas.
The director of the sequence asked one of the other extras to say these couple of lines as a Nancy boy. I mean, that's what they were called in those days. I think they're called gays now. This guy couldn't do it, and so the director turned to Ollie and said, could you do it?
It was dancing principal, and I was charming.
Can I help you? We've got this room until 3.
Isn't this Babes in the Woods?
No, we're rehearsing Journey's End.
Oh.
So sorry.
Well, I mean, where do we go?
I haven't the faintest idea. You'd better sort that out with the secretary.
The asking. Some people.
Shall we start with the second act?
I think he wanted to be a star at that stage. Whatever it took to be a star. You know, he had a peacock about him. And at no stage in his life was he in love with acting. What he was in love with was being a star. And he was going to be a star.
Soon, bit parts turned into starring roles, albeit as monsters for Hammer Horror. Reed specialised in grunting and looking threatening. When he wasn't covered in hair, Reed had the right face at the right time. The late 50s and 60s saw an explosion in the youth market. Young people had money to spend and wanted films which reflected their generation. In 1964, a young director was looking for a star for his film The System, a tale of sexual promiscuity by the seaside. He saw in Reed the perfect combination of sex and danger to play the leading role. Michael Winner used Reed's screen magnetism right at the top of the film.
You hit this wonderful face in a big way, looking slightly dangerous, and the audience was always very, very knocked out by that first image.
Hey, Tinker, there's a couple of good ones up this end. Looks like a job for the camera. Your sneakers. That girl in the first-class compartment. Keep an eye on her.
The System examined youth that was out to have a good time, but in fact was insecure and sensitive underneath. And really that's what Oliver was. Oliver was deeply insecure. He was deeply sensitive, and he was immensely shy. You know, the public image of Oliver is of the roustabout, which unquestionably existed. But Oliver, when not drunk, was as quiet and lovely a person to be with as you could possibly find.
Oliver was shy to a great extent, and you know, the shyness was cured by alcohol. It is in most people, isn't it? So I would say, yes, he liked to drink because it gave him the buzz, and obviously he did more outrageous things when he was drunk.
At the beginning of his career, Reed seemed able to keep drinking and work separate. Seemingly immune from hangovers, he was never late on set, and he always knew his lines.
He had this amazing ability. I mean, even on the set, you know, I mean, if we were out all night and he was working the next day, I mean, he would go up to the sink, get cold water all over his face, look himself in the mirror and says, "How's that for a movie star?" and go down to the set.
Nonetheless, it was a drunken incident that nearly ruined his career in 1964. One night in April, Reed was attacked in the Crazy Elephant nightclub in London's West End.
Girl, I want to be with you all of the time.
Trouble began when Reed got into a war of words with a group of men at the bar. He ended up telling them to go play with themselves.
We went to the loo, and the door opened, and there's two guys there, and they were brandishing, you know, cut glass. They smashed the bottles, and obviously said, "Come to help me have a pee, then, have you?" And they just set about him.
Believe that you and me last forever. Oh yeah.
The gashes on the side of Reed's face needed 36 stitches. It put his career in jeopardy. He was turned down for a succession of lead roles. Then, out of the blue, Reed was called for an audition for the role of composer Debussy for a prestigious BBC arts series.
So he got up to go at the end, and he said, "So I won't be playing the part." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "This." And he pointed to quite a marked scar just by his chin. And I said, "I don't see anything." "So you want to do the film?" He said, "Yeah, sure." The camera liked him. The eyes, I think, promised all sorts of erotic delights. And he was wonderful in the film. He was wonderful because he didn't have to say much. And we often had this joke between us. He'd say, he knew his acting was limited, and he'd say, "Do you want Moody 1, Moody 2, or Moody 3, depending on the drama involved?" And I'd say 1 or 2, or whatever it was. And I'd always get the performance I wanted.
Leave me alone! I'll give you bloody money!
All right, then, where is it?
Money! It's there! And there! Go on, eat it. Show that to some of your friends. You never understood anything.
You
he could be quite unpredictable. And he could also get very frightening. I mean, suddenly grab you like this and said, you shouldn't have said that. You know, I take a lot from you, but, you know, Jesus, he called me Jesus for some reason or other. You know, one move and I'll knock your fucking teeth down your fucking throat. And you thought, God, he's going to. And then you said, ha, let's have a drink. You know, it was just... But if you were a stranger, you know, you didn't know that was... You know, you could be shitting yourself.
On the success of Debussy, Reed's career took off. The world was his oyster, but he chose Wimbledon. This respectable suburb of London had been his boyhood home. Here, Reed attempted to create the sense of security that he'd never known as a child by surrounding himself with friends and family. In 1959, he'd fallen for a model, Kate Byrne. Within a year, they married and they had a son.
She was stunningly, devastatingly beautiful and Irish, a hell of a character. And they just sparked off each other. I mean, she was very good for him, you know. And life was full of laughter in those days.
They both seemed very much in love and they were very happy together. And Kate liked to drink, Ollie liked to drink. Kate was a great communicator with people. She was a fun person. Loved to party, loved to drink, loved meeting people, loved excitement, and I thought they were very well matched. To me, she was one of the crowd. I mean, she was super.
John Plackett, a sign maker, was one of the men Reed met in Wimbledon locals who became friends and lifelong drinking partners. Bill Dobbo Dobson was a boiler engineer in a hospital.
Well, I met him in The Dog and Fox. I didn't know of him as Oliver Reed. I mean, he wasn't a movie star, he was, as I did say, I mean, I was working at the hospital and I was earning more money than Oliver at that particular time.
By the end of the 1960s, Reed was a household name with films like Oliver, The Jokers and Hannibal Brooks behind him. And when he hit the big time, he insisted that friends like Dobbo shared the high life with him.
I mean, often we'd go up London and sit with the stars, you know what I mean? And then I used to say, well, what can I talk to them about? I said, I've got nothing to say to people. Like, don't worry, he said, you just come and have a drink and enjoy yourselves and just don't bother about it. He said, don't think of it like that. He said, you're as good as what they are. And he made me feel good by saying that.
We do treat stars differently when they become stars. And so suddenly other people would behave differently to him. He hated that. That's why he always ran around with people he'd known who he was sure would never change. As soon as there was anything artificial involved around Oliver, he'd run a mile.
As Reed's success grew, he took on a personal staff. Typically, he surrounded himself with those he felt most secure. His brother David became his business manager and Simon his press agent.
He loved that kind of closeness and, you know, us all being together. I remember walking down the road once with David and Ollie. And Ollie turned to us and he said, do you know, one day, he said, we're going to be bigger than Warner Brothers. And I think he meant it.
My next guest is one of Britain's few international film stars.
In the early 70s, when Reed appeared on Parkinson, he was at the pinnacle of his career.
He is a gothic hero in the living, lusting flesh. He smoulders, a mobile furnace.
In those days, Reed was an impeccable chat show guest.
Ladies and gentlemen, Oliver Reed.
He had made cinema history by being Britain's first full-frontal male nude in Ken Russell's film Women in Love.
I feel I must ask you this question, Oliver, because everybody's been asking me it this week about the nudity in Women in Love. I mean, you did that. You're not going to do another one, or so you said in research.
Yes, I did that because Ken Russell he's a gnome.
and he comes shuffling into your house at about 12:30 at night, or was it in the morning, and he tells you a story, and then he enthuses you, and then he said, and then there's this marvellous scene where you wrestle naked, and then we do that, and 6 months before the film's made, you say, fine. And it came to...
Reed's co-star was Alan Bates.
How do you start? Well, you can't do much in a stuffed shirt.
Reed performed the build-up to the wrestling scene as if he relished the idea of a naked grapple. In fact, he and Bates were both extremely reluctant.
When it came to the time, Oliver developed a limp. He suddenly sprained his ankle, and Alan Bates developed a strong cold. And I said, well, you'll get over it. And they said, and then the next day they produced doctor's certificates to say they couldn't wrestle in the nude or fully clothed.
The problem was male pride. The issue was whose penis was the biggest, and that was only resolved in the pub the night before filming.
They were tanked up on beer, so they went out to the men's outside toilet, and the moonlight was shining, and they unbuttoned and they got on with it. They saw there wasn't much in it, actually, and so they agreed to have a go. Though Oliver did cheat a bit by, just before the take, he'd go behind a screen and give nature a helping hand.
The gusto with which they threw themselves into their naked wrestling belied their initial reluctance and helped to create one of British cinema's most memorable scenes. By 1969, Reed's marriage was on the rocks, not because of his drinking, but because of another woman. He'd started an affair with a dancer, Jackie Darrell, who he'd met on a film set. When she became pregnant, he secretly installed her in a flat. It did not remain secret for long.
It came, to a terrible end, because we were at Heathrow Airport, and I remember he was coming back from a movie. So I went up to meet him, and they both turned up. Kate and Jackie, and they stood about 20 yards apart in front of, you come out of the customs hall, and that gate opens, and you come out, and there's nowhere, you can't turn around. I mean, you're there. And they were standing there, basically saying, choose.
Reed chose Jackie. 2 years later, in 1971, they moved, with their daughter Sarah, to the country. His work with Ken Russell had brought critical acclaim. Tough man action roles brought him millionaire status and a house to match. Broome Hall in Surrey was a Victorian country house with 50 acres of land. It cost him £85,000, a fortune then, and it was virtually derelict.
He said he was looking for a place where he could ride his horse, and that the place went with it. I don't know. He loved it, though. He just loved it, I could tell. Again, never talk about it, but you could see the pride. I remember going there the first time, and he walked me around the place, and it was mind-boggling for me. And I think he had an immense sense of pride in it. Yeah, so it was a statement. Look at me. I'm worth 52 bedrooms. How about you?
The new Lord and Lady of Broome Hall set to work renovating their stately home, supervising up to 30 workmen paid full-time for years. As often as not, Reed ordered them to down tools in order to down drinks.
They'd say to the builders, how long will it take to do? And they'd say, a week. And 2 months later, it wasn't finished. And Oliver would say, those bastard builders, Stephen, they haven't finished. Can you believe it? They said 1 week. And I'd go down and what was he doing, They were drinking, 11 o'clock, he'd say, there's nobody here, come on, go down to the pub. Only for a short time, mind you. You've got fucking walls to build. And then when they'd gone, he'd go in the garden, look, they've done absolutely nothing today. But he took them down to the pub, Oliver. Yes, but only for a little while. All day.
Reed missed the company of his old Wimbledon pals. He persuaded Dobbo to come to Broom Hall, theoretically as head gardener.
I did spend most of my time with Oliver drinking, you know, and we'd be around the garden, and the first thing he used to do is pop around the garden, go like that. And I knew what that was. It was a drinking session. He was in the Rolls Royce, and we stopped at the front of the gate at Broom Hall, and then he said to me, let's see how fast we can get this up the drive. Had a big green Rolls Royce open top. And we drove it up, this was after drinking session, we drove it up to Broom Hall and smashed it into the bridge, and he wrote it off, and he got out of the car and slammed the door. He never fucking liked it anyway, Dobbo.
The most legendary drinking session was the visit paid by 45 rugby players on a stag night. The party downed 32 bottles of scotch, 17 of gin, and 50 gallons of beer. Reed, who by now had developed a taste for showing off his tackle, led the boys in a bollock-naked strip-tease. But somehow, despite the constant drinking, work got done. Reed insisted that the place was restored in perfect period detail. It took 8 years and cost a fortune. But his real pride and joy was the garden, which he and Dobbo restored to its full Victorian glory.
Broom Hall gave him space to do some of the things that he wanted to do with regard to the more imaginative sides of his life. This was a huge empty canvas with Broom Hall sitting in it, and from there on he went to work sort of creating the colours that surrounded it. It became just the most magical garden.
There was a part of Broom Hall, there's what we used to call the Magic Garden, and he used to take us down there and make us sit there very quietly and in absolute silence and just say, right, we're going to sit here until we see a fairy. And we'd sit there, and then all of a sudden he'd go, right, I'm bored now, and he'd jump up, and like the Pied Piper, we'd all jump up and sort of follow him off and to the next adventure.
But some adventures were more dangerous than others. Reed kept a pair of broadswords in pride of place in the dining room.
When he'd had quite a few drinks, out had come the sauce. And you'd stand back because you thought, because you're going to get your head chopped off if you're not careful. And I remember him and Ken Russell having a duel, and they was fighting away at each other.
I had this blinking 6-foot sword, and he said, now you've got to try and kill me. I said, fine. And I raised it up, and I knew I had to try and kill him. And as he came up, I brought the sword down. It ripped his shirt open, blood poured out. And he stood there and he said, great! And sort of, although I nearly killed him, you know, I'd have, if I hadn't have done it, he would have just thought, what a wimp.
Reed had been continuing his professional collaboration with Ken Russell.
The order itself. That's sacrilege. Look, there he is. Now there's a man well worth going to hell for, eh?
He played renegade cleric Father Grandier in The Devils. His sexual magnetism was undiminished by the priest's robes.
I knew he had to be a sensual man because an entire convent fell in love with him. Well, Oliver had that quality in bucket loads. But I knew Grandier had to make a few very demanding speeches where he roused the whole city to stand up against Cardinal Richelieu. And I thought, well, you know, I hope he can do it.
Control of the entire country. The significance of our walls is that we are self-governing. Yes. Richelieu hates this. He deceives the king.
He just absolutely staggered me. I mean, it was a performance of tremendous power and authority. He had that authority. And I think Oliver was a very authoritative character.
And with the security of our independence gone, our freedoms would go too. we must write to the king, declare our loyalty and trust in his wisdom and justice.
He made those films with Ken Russell, which had a kind of intellectual quality, which he loved. I mean, even though there was no bullshit about him, he loved that kind of rounding off of, there's the hard man and here's someone who plays the art house films. So it was kind of making the circle there.
By the time he made The Three Musketeers in 1973, Hollywood producers were offering Reed plum roles in films like Jaws and The Sting.
He was up there, and he had this immense following of aficionados. And he could have been an enormous star because Hollywood was ready to welcome him into very big parts in major pictures.
His contemporaries Sean Connery and Michael Caine had already made the move to America. But Reed, the biggest fish in Britain, wouldn't cross the pond.
I remember saying to Ollie, you've got to go to Hollywood. And he didn't want to do it. Why, I don't know. I think he felt he'd kind of done it, to a certain degree. He was the biggest star in Europe at that stage. He needed to get another leg up to be the biggest star in the world, or among the best 5 stars in the world. He wasn't prepared to do that. To his eyes, that would be tarting himself around.
I sat Oliver down one day at Broom Hall and said, look, you've got to go to America. And I said, look, we'll put the whole Broom Hall in mothballs. I said, I promise you don't have to lose it. You know, we'll keep it, we'll put everything in mothballs, we'll keep a team going here and come back, and it'll all be here when you come back. He said, I'm not going. I'm not going. He said, oh, Dave, I'm true blue. I'm Brit. I'm staying here.
Ollie Reed is the superstar who stayed. He earns millions per picture, pays a great deal of it back in tax, and still he stays. The reason is largely this: Broom Hall.
By the time Valerie Singleton paid Reed a visit, Broom Hall had become a millstone around his neck. To pay for its upkeep, he was taking virtually any part going, most of them instantly forgettable.
I'm interested in trying to cross.
He chose to stay with what he was comfortable with, and his work probably suffered as a result of it. He chose the best life for himself. It may not have had a lot of logic for a lot of other people, but it had real logic for him.
What is the history of the house, Ollie?
Oh, it's been a house here since 1010, and then it was added on to 1744, and then it's Victorian, and the whole thing is, Oh, damn that gin and tonic.
The consummate on-screen professional had begun to fool around.
Than I do.
I liked it.
As his film career stalled and his ambition waned, Reed's drinking became heavier. Close friends knew what to expect.
If he had too much to drink, we used to get that Mr. Nasty used to arrive, and then people that knew us well knew when to leave, because I used to know when he started, his cheek used to start twitching, and I used to say to him, oh, Mr. Nasty's arrived, and he used to give me that little angry look of him and do all that, oh, Major.
Oliver changed over the years. From being happy, he became aggressive and could become terribly aggressive. I mean, verbally and physically, but more verbally. But when that's in the hands of an actor of the build of Oliver, it's quite intimidating, to say the least.
Who would bear the brunt of his aggression?
Women, basically. He was terrified of women, I think.
In his 1979 autobiography, he wrote, I like women in their place. I like them on their knees in the kitchen. In return, I feed them, wine them, make them laugh, and give them a punch on the nose when they need it. He wasn't entirely joking.
Ollie was very much a man's man. I don't think it was no secret, really, that Ollie and I didn't really hit it off. It was a great sort of love-hate relationship. I didn't put up with what he said. He didn't like women to contradict him. I mean, then he would get very abusive and very nasty. He was a frightening man. Very frightening.
Towards the end of the 70s, Reed's long-term partner Jackie Darrell found life in Broomhall increasingly difficult to cope with.
Jackie and Oliver were having, in the end, a very tempestuous, and she was having, I mean, I think she'll mind me saying, a really awful time, you know, because Oliver was very, very, very abusive.
And I believe it came to a head in Broomhall on New Year's Eve, when Oliver couldn't wait for it to become midnight. So he put the clock on the kitchen wall to midnight, set it to midnight, and said, now it's midnight, now it's New Year. And he got his shotgun, and he shot the clock off the wall, and it went all around the thing, breaking all the things in the kitchen, etc., etc. And as far as I know, that's when Jackie said, that's it.
Reed sold Broomhall within a month of Jackie Darrell leaving.
When to take quite as much liquor as you do they, Ollie? Isn't all this going to catch up with you one day?
There we go, Rog.
That's pretty good, isn't it? Eh?
Well, no, I'm not falling over, Roger. No.
By 1980, Reed was beginning to hone his unique approach to TV appearances.
If you look at Oliver's career as the career of an artist and the career of an actor, it went into the toilet. It basically vanished.
But his career as a hellraiser really took off. Boozing, brawling, and his personal speciality, trouser dropping to reveal what he called his mighty mallet.
He was talking about it, and I said, God, Oliver, you're talking about that silly little thing again, you know, that ridiculous little thing. I bet you, Stephen Ford, right now, that I've got a bigger cock than you. And I said, oh, OK, fine. What are we going to do about it? Right, come through. And then we went through to the back room, and big mirror there with him. And he said, right, trousers down. And he lost. Still pulling his trousers up, he went back into the bar. Silence, everybody, stop. Stop! Of course, everybody stopped straight away. I wish to announce that Stephen Ford's got a bigger cock than I have.
Now in his 40s, Reed was undergoing his own version of a midlife crisis. With 2 failed relationships behind him, he was on the lookout for a new partner.
Ollie and a friend of his decided, they both got divorced rather recently, and they both said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to find a young girl. This is terrible, really, and train her up.
Josephine, I first heard of by Oliver phoning me up here and saying, Steve, I've found the woman I'm going to marry. What are you talking about? This is young girl. I've seen her on the school bus. What? On the school bus? Well, yes. She's beautiful, and she comes into the pub with her mother, and her mother's charming, Anne, and I'm going to marry this girl, Steve.
It was funny, in a way. What was Ollie then? 40-odd. She was 16. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. It was just amazing. Surprised? Yeah. Shocked even. But it turned out fine. It turned out to be the right choice again. But at the time, it just seemed so bizarre. And the press, of course, had a field day, because they sort of tagged her as some kind of Lolita figure. Well, and she's not that. She's, you know, very bright and quite old-fashioned in a way.
5 years after they met, when Josephine was 21, they tied the knot.
And you are now husband
Shut up! You want to say something intelligent.
He loved her from day one. Absolutely, definitely loved her. And he was completely besotted, you know, he was absolutely... So whenever you went into the pub with Josephine, he was so attentive, looking after her in every way, and perhaps he calmed down a little bit at that time, because he clearly didn't want to lose her.
In 1986, Reed bought a home in Guernsey, where he and Josephine spent 6 months a year for the rest of the decade to avoid tax. One New Year, Stephen Ford went to visit him.
After New Year, after we had this wild party, he said, let's ditch the girls and let's go up on the cliffs. And that was one of the nicest times I remember, ever, because it was just so nice and gentle, and it was just, you know, walking along and Oliver describing the things. And do you know what sort of tree that is, Stephen? And do you know what that is? Look, oh, that's rare. Do you know what that is? And, you know, people wouldn't think that Oliver would know anything about this, but he was very much into that.
You know, he would just say, you know, if there's anything you need, you know, I'm always here. And he didn't mean financially. He meant, you know, he was always there for a cuddle, or he was always there for some advice. And a lot of people think that maybe he wasn't the best person for advice, but he was, because he was just this honest person who just said, go out there and do it. And there's a wonderful thing he used to say to me, was basically, he used to say, girlie, come out clapping your hands as loudly as possible. And by that he meant, just be honest. Be honest. There should be no falsities. There's always black and white. There's no grey. And just be as true to everyone as possible, and you can't go wrong. Failing that, just follow your nose.
In 1986, Reed was cast in a film that showed a glimpse of his former acting glory.
Hey, Luce! Luce, come on down! Come on! Look, it is ready! I promise you I teach you to tango, no?
Gerald, we need shelter, we need food! This is a God!
Hey! I thought you wanted to learn something when you were here! What do you think this is, bloody Devil's Island?
Reed's performance dominates the scene. He clearly relished playing Gerald Kingsland, a man who escapes in flights of fancy from the reality of life on a desert island.
So I was very happy to see The Castaway, because that was Ollie back on old form. But he was, in a way, he was playing the fading sex symbol in a way, you know, because, you know, he's playing the part of a dirty old man on an island with, you know, one of the most desirable chicks in the world, you know, and that wouldn't have been lost on Oliver, I'm sure, as a man, as distinguished from an actor.
You never ask questions. You know what I mean about life, God.
Those that knew Reed felt he was very much playing himself in the film.
I just want to know what goes on inside your head, that's all.
My brain. Oh, it's like my prick. It goes up and down of its own accord. And sometimes it explodes with excitement. But when you see it lying there, just doing nothing at all, then you'll be surprised what it's capable of thinking.
Reed's performance was considered his best for years. On its cinema release, he went on a promotional tour to publicise the film.
My next guest is an actor who has kept audiences on the edge of their seats, directors on...
He was always a good booking, but on this particular occasion, we'd had word from the researcher who was travelling with him. We've stopped again and was drinking large quantities of whatever, but nothing prepared us quite for what the apparition that lurched onto the set.
Ladies and gentlemen, Oliver Reed.
I thought, how am I actually going to handle this? Because one thing I knew I couldn't do was take the mickey.
Gin and orange?
You can't do that because he was incapacitated. It may have been his fault, but he was vulnerable. But at the same time, I was excited and pleased because I knew this was going to be great television, and to be cruel about it, that was what we were there for.
I was known as the wild one by all the folks around. I was known as the wild one by all the folks around. Baby down, she swore tight, broke her off like the other guys.
And it was hideous to watch. I mean, you know, it was almost going back to pre-teen days of hiding behind the sofa. Goodness me, what's he going to do next? It was awful to watch, awful to watch. But he thought he was great. He thought he was sensational. You know, he didn't care. I think, actually, he probably thought he was better at it than he was. I think he thought, I'm quite good at it, and I'm giving them what they want.
You just celebrated a birthday. Is this why you've had thoughts of retirement, as I mentioned earlier?
No, but the cost of being is fairly serious.
I don't think I ever felt embarrassed about very much that he ever did. That's who he was. It was very much part of his character. But there were times where he overstepped the mark, where you would cringe a little and think, oh, I wished he hadn't done that.
You were teaching at Sandhurst. I mean, you're trained not to let that impinge on you.
In 1991, Reed appeared on Channel 4's open-ended intellectual forum to give his perspective on male violence. He was drinking from the outset.
Your emotions, and the ultimate thing is...
The discussion turned to women's motivation for abortions. Reed became increasingly aggressive and incoherent.
No bullshit. It's all down to whether or not she wants to get shafted.
Yes.
That's it. Everything's very happy in bed.
I'm not against divorce.
So,
we've already I am against
but
divorce.
well, we got beyond that.
We got beyond. Okay.
No, we haven't got beyond that. That's what happens right at the end. 10 years later, first year, does he really shaft me? Does it come down 10 years? Years later, is he still shaft me? Sorry if I hadn't seen when I'm drinking wine, but that's what happens. Not saying it's my wife.
I really would like to get on to...
All of us were I mean, when I say all of us, Simon, my youngest brother, and I, and Pete, our father, we were all worried that he was going over the top, you know, and so we did a family letter.
Me and one or two others wrote a letter to him saying that we didn't think his drinking was doing a great deal for his career. And perhaps he was misbehaving once too often in private as well. He was just a bit disappointed, I think. We'd missed the point. Point was, doesn't really matter. You know, don't get so upset about it. It's all right. Calm down. That's the point.
In 1993, Oliver and Josephine moved to the south coast of Ireland, and life appeared to take on a different pace as Reed passed 50.
Ireland made him very happy because everyone took him at face value completely. And, you know, they didn't give a hoot about who he was or what he was. He was just Ollie, and he was a little bit eccentric, and he fitted in perfectly. Yeah, very happy there. And once again set about changing the house and doing the garden and planting and, yeah, so happy times.
Reed teamed up one last time with his old mentor Ken Russell for the film Prisoner of Honor.
The last film he did for me, I felt sort of the spark had gone. I mean, he didn't seem the same man even, you know. I mean, there was always some animal, you know, lurking under the surface there in him. And the animal had either been tamed or driven out of his body, it seemed to me.
For the last few years, Reed had barely worked when top Hollywood director Ridley Scott called out of the blue. He wanted Reed to come to Malta to play a fading strongman in his new film Gladiator. Reed took the job and, typically, found the most English bar on the island, a pub called, well, The Pub. On Sunday, May the 2nd, he had the day off filming. He was relaxing in the pub with his wife and visiting sailors. Reed was in high spirits. He'd started drinking at 10 and, according to one account, by 2 o'clock he had drunk 12 double shots of rum, 8 bottles of lager and half a bottle of whiskey. He'd also been arm wrestling. He'd taken on and beaten a number of challengers. But the strain on his heart proved too much.
For the first few seconds, Josephine was on the phone, and I thought, and she was crying, and she said, "He's gone. I need your help." And I've gone. You know, it took me 4 or 5 seconds to really know that this wasn't another Ollie wind-up, you know, because he wouldn't be beyond even faking his own death, you know, to create that little nudge, that little extra happening.
Reed was brought back to Ireland for the funeral. Few celebrities turned up, but thousands of ordinary people came to pay their respects.
They got Ollie out of the wagon, you know, and a sort of amazing sort of, I mean, they're sort of clapping, and there were voices saying, "Go to it, Ollie." And then this piper, single lone piper, piped up, and, oh gosh, it was moving. I mean, I can hardly stop crying now. And we all walked in.
I never cry at funerals. I didn't cry at my mother's, I didn't cry at my father's. I cried at Oliver Reed's. I came back from the coffin weeping.
When we first went to look at the graveyard before the funeral had been arranged, the three of us, Josephine, Sarah and myself, walked into the graveyard. It was like, yes, this is the place. It's the right place for him to be buried, in a country he loved, with people he loved and cared about dearly, opposite his local boozer.
Just miss all the fun and the banter, and there aren't characters like Oliver emerging any longer. You know, they're not there. There just aren't wild characters like that who'll do anything. They're just not there. Life has got much more boring, and life will be more boring without Oliver. No doubt about it.
Next Thursday at 10, a documentary focusing on those who make a living from making sex films, the very distinctive world of British video pornography, in Boogie Night.
Jam.